You stayed late again. Everyone else went home hours ago. There was something you could have asked a colleague to help with, something that would have taken them 20 minutes. But you did not ask. You handled it yourself. It took you 2 hours. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet voice told you that this was the right way, the strong way, the only way. If that sounds familiar, if asking for help feels almost physically uncomfortable, this video is going to explain exactly why and what it is costing you without you realizing it. There is a specific kind of person who hates asking for help. They are not difficult. They are not antisocial. They are not proud in the arrogant sense of the word. They are simply people who learned very early and very thoroughly that needing help was something to be avoided, that the right response to a problem was to solve it yourself, quietly, without burdening anyone else, without drawing attention to the fact that you were struggling. And if you recognize yourself in that description, you are not alone. This pattern runs deep in millions of people across every background, every generation, every kind of life. And it did not come from nowhere. It came from somewhere very specific. And understanding where it came from is the first step toward carrying it a little more lightly. Because here is what most people who hate asking for help never find out about themselves. The very strength that makes them so capable is built on a foundation that sometimes works against them in ways they cannot easily see. For many people who hate asking for help, the origin of this pattern is strikingly clear once they look for it. You grew up in an environment where self-reliance was the highest value. Maybe resources were limited and asking felt like adding to someone else's burden. Maybe the adults around you modeled silence. They handled their own problems without complaint and without asking. Maybe asking was met with impatience or dismissal often enough that you learned it was safer not to. Whatever the specific shape of it, the message you received was consistent and powerful. Capable people handle their own problems, and you internalized it completely. By the time you were an adult, you had stopped noticing it as a rule. It had simply become who you were. This shows up in your work life in ways that are quietly costly. You take on more than your share because asking someone to share the load feels like admitting you cannot handle it. You stay late rather than delegate. You redo things yourself rather than ask a colleague to adjust their work. You sit with problems longer than necessary because the moment of asking feels worse than the problem itself. And at home, it is the same pattern in a different setting. You fix things, manage things, carry things, often without telling the people closest to you that you are struggling. Your family sees capability. What they do not always see is the cost of that capability to you. Research on self-reliance and workplace behavior consistently shows that people with high independence drives, who rarely ask for help, are significantly more likely to experience burnout, make avoidable errors from working in isolation, and report lower job satisfaction despite often being high performers. The ability that makes you so dependable is the same ability that quietly exhausts you when it is never allowed to rest. And this leads directly to something that most people in this situation find even harder to admit, because it lives much deeper than the habit of working alone. Underneath the self-reliance is a fear that most people who hate asking for help carry quietly and rarely examine directly. It is the fear that asking will change how people see you, that a colleague will think less of your competence, that your partner will feel burdened, that your children will worry, that whoever you ask will secretly wish you had not. And so you do not ask. You manage instead. You minimize. On the rare occasions when you do finally reach out, you frame the request so small that the other person barely recognizes it as one. You say things like, "Sorry to bother you," or "I know you are busy," or "It is probably nothing." You diminish the ask, before it can be diminished by someone else. What makes this pattern particularly painful is the irony at the heart of it. The people in your life, the colleagues who respect you, the partner who loves you, the children who look up to you, they do not experience your self-sufficiency purely as a strength. They experience it sometimes as a wall, as distance, as a message that says, "I do not need you." And because you never ask, they never get the chance to show up for you the way you show up for everyone else. You have quietly removed from the people who love you the thing that makes relationships feel mutual: the chance to give back. Studies on interpersonal relationships and help-seeking behavior show that people who rarely ask for help report feeling significantly more alone in their closest relationships than people who ask freely, despite being surrounded by people who genuinely want to support them. The wall built to protect against weakness ends up creating the very isolation it was meant to prevent. And here's what all of this means and what it points toward. Because understanding this pattern is genuinely the beginning of something different. For many people, this goes back further than their own childhood. The generations that shaped many of us, parents and grandparents who lived through genuine hardship, treated self-reliance not as a preference, but as a survival skill. Asking for help in genuinely scarce times was sometimes genuinely not an option. And so, they did not ask. They managed, they endured, and they passed that posture down, not through words, but through example, through the quiet dignity of a parent who never complained, through the subtle message that strength meant silence. They were not wrong for their time, but the world has changed. And the habit of never asking, which once protected people, now sometimes isolates them. And here is the shift that makes everything feel different. Because asking for help is not the opposite of strength. It is one of the most specific and overlooked expressions of it. Awareness is where everything starts. Simply noticing, in the moment, that familiar resistance rising when you could ask for help, and recognizing it for what it is. Not wisdom, not strength. Just an old rule from a different time, running automatically in a life that has changed considerably since that rule was written. That noticing is already real progress. And then one small step further. This week, try one small ask, at work or at home, that you would normally have handled alone. Not a crisis, just something small. Ask a colleague to take something off your plate. Tell your partner you are finding something hard. Let one of your children do something for you that you would normally do yourself. And notice what happens. Notice that the world does not end. Notice that the person you asked does not think less of you. Notice that they almost always say yes and mean it. Asking for help is not a sign that you cannot manage. It is an invitation for the people around you to be part of your life in the way they have always wanted to be. That is not weakness, that is connection. And connection is what makes everything, the work, the home, the whole long effort of a life, actually worth carrying. If this video felt like it was written about you, share it with someone who would recognize themselves in it too. And if you want to understand yourself and grow a little more every single week, subscribe to Mindra Explained. It is completely free, and there is something new every week made just for you. See you next time.